If rest feels like something you have to earn, I'm speaking to myself, you're not broken, right? You're carrying something very old. And so you get to decide whether or not you keep carrying it or you put it down. The goal is not to stop valuing work, it's to stop needing it to tell you who you are.
Welcome to the After Chapter podcast. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Cecilia. We explore who you are when the roles fall away.
And pour into what's next, one conversation at a time. Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
Hey.
Hi. So welcome, everyone, again. Today's episode, Work as Worth. It really came to be because of you all and your feedback, your comments on our platforms around episode 2 with the guest who we had, Felicia Scott. And she had talked about the empty calendar and always needing to be busy. And so something happened where we didn't really expect this. We didn't expect this type of, as I said, just feedback around it. So it is, this episode is really around that shame about having that quiet time, the guilt about a week where you have no obligations, that feeling that rest has to be justified, and even Cecilia said it herself in that episode.
Yeah, I really do. And I still struggle with that I have to earn my rest. Like there's a voice that says, if I'm still, am I worthy of being still? There's always a list. There's always something. And I really don't think that I can properly rest until that list is done. Even in a resting mode, my mind is constantly running. And so I appreciated that thread that we didn't really get to pull as much as we wanted to. And so this is an opportunity for us to dig deeper.
Yeah.
Which I think is valuable.
Yeah. And so this episode really is for anyone who's ever felt that, anyone whose identity has been tied to productivity, and that quiet calendar, that empty calendar makes them feel guilty. And so, and also not just guilty, like it's a problem.
Yeah.
So just as when, people say, when you're upset, don't be upset, relax. We're not going to tell
Don't tell me to relax.
We're not going to tell you to just relax.
Yes.
So we're really here to try to trace where that voice comes from. And one of our listeners, whose commentary we reached out to find a little bit more about, her commentary was that it does come from somewhere, and it goes really further back than any of us really expected or thought about.
Yeah.
And so we are going to be talking about who taught us to be busy and what has that really cost us. So as I alluded to, one of our listeners did bring this back to us. So clearly, as we always do, we have a guest, and we're not doing this alone. So we have someone who's going to be joining us in this conversation, Sylvia Goldman. So we'll just say for now, welcome to the After Chapter, Sylvia. Hi,
welcome,
Sylvia.
Hi, Michelle. Hi, Celia. How are you?
It's good to see you, but we don't go deep until we pour. And so I've been looking at this lovely glass here. It's just so pretty. So tell me a little bit about what's going on in the glass.
Sure. And it may look, and it is kind of is very fallish, even though we're in spring. But it's chosen very intentionally. So today we're pouring a sparkling apple cider with rosemary. So apple has very deep roots with American harvest culture. So it's abundance that's tied to labor, worth tied to yield, the American ideal right in a glass. And then the rosemary is for remembrance. So that's the slowing down just long enough to ask yourself, what do you really remember about rest? And whether anyone ever told you that it was allowed or not. And then, sparkling water, club soda really just keeps it celebratory, because we do think rest is something that we should want and we should celebrate it.
We
It's
have
worth
earned it.
celebrating. That's
Exactly.
right.
Exactly.
And even though we haven't really yet learned how to do it well. So, but that's our drink for now. And so, Sylvia, what are
What are
you
you
having?
pouring?
I am so boring. I am having wine.
Well, this is very good. And I think back to youth and not being able to have a proper drink and having my sparkling apple cider when everyone else was having wine. And so now this is a grown-up version of that.
Yes.
And
Maybe,
so
the rosemary
the
brought you some
rosemary,
remembrance.
it brought it back. But as you know, we do have a guest, and I do want to take a moment and properly introduce her and tell you a little bit about her. And so our guest has spent nearly 5 decades supporting people through some of the most significant transition of their lives. So personal change, relationships, I, identity, and what it means to step into a new chapter. And so Sylvia Goldman is a New York State licensed master social worker and certified professional coach. And so over the course of her career, she's worked with individuals, with couples, with families, with groups across the private, nonprofit, and corporate sectors. She earned her Master of Social Work in Clinical Social Work from Syracuse University and has served her community as a board member of the Ridgewood YMCA and a trustee of the Tuxedo Park School in Tuxedo Park, New York. But what makes Sylvia especially right for this conversation is not just the depth of her career and her expertise, is that she herself has lived multiple chapters, stepping away from professional work to raise her two her children and returning to the workforce later in life. And so earning her coaching certification and now navigating retirement. So Sylvia, you are where I want to be. So thank you. And so she knows personally what it's like when a calendar empties, not just as theory, but as life. So thank you so much for being here, Sylvia.
Thank you so much for having me. I really am excited about being here. So
Great.
where to begin?
So before we get into the cultural and the professional side of all of this, we'd love to start with you. So you're retired. That's like a dream for us. So like, what is that actually like?
My gut answer, allowing yourself the time to be.
Before we even dive deeper into that, as I had alluded to, you had reached out and had said to me about that episode too, Sylvia, that there are some cultural reasons around that empty calendar. There's some roots around it. So I want to give the audience a little bit of foundation around that as we continue our discussion. So we're talking about why does that rest feel like something that we have to earn, as Cecilia had said. And the more that we did look at it and look at the history in the United States around it, the further back that it does really go. So it started basically with the Puritans, which were English Protestants in the 1500s, whose mission it was to purify the church. So in the 1600s, some of those Puritans left England and came to the United States, to Massachusetts specifically, to create that society that was going to be so moral and disciplined, it was going to serve as an example to the entire world. So clearly one of those ideas and key ideas around that Puritan work ethic was around that hard work, discipline, and moral behavior signal spiritual seriousness. So this left one of the deepest cultural roots of how Americans think about work, success, and even morality. Then in the late and early 20th century, that moral framework merged with that concept of what we know as the American dream. So the American dream led to that hard work leads to success and upward mobility. So over time, that the ethic shift from work as devotion, as the Puritans started that with, to work as identity. So the busyness signaled your worth. And that's why retirement, sabbaticals, career pauses really can create that anxiety in specifically the United States in a way that they don't in other cultures where they don't place so much moral weight on work. So I just wanted to make sure that the audience is a little bit grounded in that concept of where did this come from, and
Mhm.
specifically for the in the United States specifically.
And the busyness is a an acceptable way, an approved way of running, is keeping ourselves moving. But yes, when you've lost something, when things are changing, when you feel out of control, when you are not where you thought you'd be in life, we have to sit with that moment.
So, Sylvia, someone who has spent those decades, as Cecilia said, working with people in major life transitions, how do you see that cultural inheritance showing up in some people that you've worked with or even yourself?
I see it in both. I see it in the people that I've worked with, and certainly myself. I'll start objectively with some of the people I work with. There was a time where I specialized in older adults as a clinician. And so one of the phenomena was helping them adjust to life without work, without that structure. You know, as we always, what's next? What does that look like? Some people had absolutely no trouble with that. You know, they had hobbies and families and almost more to keep them busy than they did when they were working, because they could now do things that they had never been able to do before. But others, their whole identity was involved with their work. So what happens now? Who are we? When we go to a cocktail party, people always say, well, what do you do?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that becomes who you are. And so if you're not doing something, then how do you respond? And I I watched and listened and learned when I was with people who were going through this, and I thought, this is going to be me someday. And I kept on thinking, okay, how am I going to respond? Who am I going to be? None of what I thought, by the way, ever came to fruition. I really have totally different responses and thoughts about it now.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, and
But the people that you were working with, the ones specifically who um, wrapped their identity around work and as they were entering retirement, did they share with you what they were feeling, how they were navigating that or transitioning into retirement? If you could talk more about the when they are there, what were they thinking?
some people were actually thinking very positive things, very, now I can do all that I have put off. But I know that's not kind of where, what you'd like to hear about.
No, no, if that's the
No.
case, that's the case.
Yeah.
But I
There,
just
there
wanted to
was
hear both sides.
there was definitely that group then, but there were a lot of people of, who am I now? What am I going to do with myself?
Mhm.
How am I going to, what is my life going to look like? I almost was going to say that I saw it more with men than women, but that was a generational, that age population I was working with was definitely an older population. So, these are folks that were born in the 20s and 30s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was very significant for them. And so they talked a lot about that. Some, as I say, were thrilled. Others were, particularly men, like, who am I? What do I now do? Am I just going to sit in my house or take my long walks and have a cocktail? And then what? There was
Okay.
definitely, because some people don't have hobbies, they don't cultivate hobbies. Families really helped. If they were busy helping out their children and their grandchildren, that helped. But a lot of it was, they were very used to getting up at a certain hour, going to work, working a certain number of hours, doing that, at least 5 days a
Routine.
week,
Yeah.
sometimes more. And that was now changing. So one of the things we talked about when I was counseling people was, is there anything exciting about this? Is there any, what is it just all about loss? Because that was a part of it.
Mhm.
Some people, most people had to grieve the loss of their job and that particular identity. And what was next was going to help with that grief. But there is loss, there's always some grief. But
Yes.
for many people, there was excitement. It was so dependent upon individuals. I can't tell you that it just went one way or another. In my experience, I know that there are phenomenal books that definitely provide information that seems to lean one way or another. But in my personal experience with my clientele, and I serviced, let's say, 100 people a month. I It wasn't a cookie cutter. It wasn't one size fits all.
Right.
So
Mhm.
much depended upon whether they were married, how long they might have been widowed, or if they were single, um, what other family members were around. So family was a big piece of it. And also productivity. Some people became very involved in their church because then they felt productive again and purposeful.
Mhm.
And our society, you were talking about that, the Puritan work ethic, how we define ourselves in productivity and purpose is very significant.
Yeah.
We're a society that what do you do? Isn't that the question?
Yeah. Yeah.
And some of us just want to be.
Yeah, there's so many different directions that I could take this because you've given us so much. But I have a second question, but I'm going to go with the first one. When you talk about how our society it defines that, the first question they ask is, "What do you do?" Right, and so your identity is tied into is tied into that, and so it's almost like busyness is sort of a currency that people judge you by how busy you are, and I know for me when people ask me, "What do I do?" I feel like if I say the big thing, that gets them more like interested. Like if I just say, "Oh," again, I can't imagine what I would say other than my real job. But I do feel like if there's some, are you worth my time in that asking, what do you do? And so I'd love to understand like what is that, how did that come to be that where it became this currency and where rest was not viewed in the same weight.
I think that's really a brilliant insight. So thank you for saying it that way. Um, I mean, the origins, I believe, really go back to that Puritan work ethic, to what the foundations of the American society. What was, one can think of the Puritan work ethic as religious, but it was also a morality, a way of looking at things, being productive, being purposeful, not wasting time. And I'm sure in your own families, you've heard expressions like this,
Right.
Mhm.
so that was a big influence on our society, how we're viewed by others and how we view ourselves. And
And
we didn't have much, or I should say, our ancestors didn't have much leisure time.
Mhm.
Think about it. When we're a more agriculturally based society, they worked
Yeah.
from dawn till dusk,
right.
ate, went to sleep, and started over again. With the Industrial Revolution, that's when things started to change.
Hmm.
I feel like we're
Um,
getting a history lesson.
I know.
It's taking me back to everything I learned in social studies. Like I remember that.
No,
Thank you,
I was just
Rosemary.
gonna, yeah. Yes. I know. I was just gonna say also, as you were speaking, Sylvia, about um it was an agricultural society. There was a lot to be done as well.
Mhm.
So of course it's all about the work, and that tied to your own worth and morality. And I just started thinking about the guilt aspect of it that some people have even nowadays, around I'll just say idleness,
Mhm.
where
Absolutely.
idleness. When that becomes part of your identity because of this, how do you think, or have you worked with those that you've tried to work with them in to separate that,
Mm.
to separate the two, where, as you said, more you saw it more within men about that's their identity, what they used to do. So is there a discussion with them around your title before retirement? That's not who you are.
It's a very good question. And yes, 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 and yes. So really, what happens is, I think it's why many people delay retirement,
Mhm.
don't really retire, or when they retire, they can get very depressed. I
Mhm.
think people are getting better at doing some of this because there's more, well, there's more leisure time while we are working now, when you think about it. How we work allows for more leisure time, and therefore those activities and things that we do can carry over to when we're not going to be working at all. And I see this, it's like a phenomenon. I see people begin to volunteer. They
Mhm.
volunteer at their church. They volunteer at a men's shelter. They volunteer to do Meals on Wheels. They're participating in Rotary Club. I mean, there must be 3 million billion things that people get involved with. But usually what I'm seeing is, church and community and family.
Right.
Mhm.
I'm going to divided that. And of course, there's all these subtitles underneath that. And so it's very interesting. I think if we look at it, those of us who are used to filling our calendar with, our work and all the good professional things that we do, probably use those same skills to fill it with all these other things.
There's other thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a different kind of busy.
It's a different kind of busy. But then I'll speak for myself. I reached a point in retirement, and I put that in quotations, where I wanted to stop being busy. I needed to have open space. I needed to just be.
Where
And
does that come from? Why did you need that?
because I realized that this was it. And I don't think it's in a morbid sense, but
Right.
this part of my life, it's not the dress rehearsal, it's the show. I can say all those
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
true things, but that was the aha moment for me. Like, wow, God willing, I have this finite amount of time, and how do I want to use it? Well, okay, so I know there are things I want to do. I want to travel, I want to volunteer, I want to spend lots of time with my grandchildren, all those kinds of wonderful things that we all think about. But then I thought about, I just need to be a little bit, like just not be encumbered. Like if I want to sleep late and stay in my PJs the whole day, well, heck, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
I know this sounds silly, but I experimented with it.
Okay.
Mhm.
We're not used to doing that.
No.
And I have other friends who have gone through that same process. They go,
Mm.
I didn't get dressed today. That seems to be a big thing.
It's like a secret. A
Yeah.
secret.
It was like, wow, So I guess what I'm saying is that leaving the door open for all kinds of possibilities, because it's just another stage and phase of our lives.
Right.
Mhm.
It's not the end. It's
Yeah.
not even, may I say, the final. It's
Right.
just another one.
Yeah.
So that's what helped me. Some people may disagree, and that's fine, or may have a different approach. But it's important, we work hard, right? We work, we want to be productive. But a lot of what we're doing is for others in one way or another, for the company, for the client, for our coworkers. So this is a phenomenal time when we can look at ourselves. What do we
Yeah.
want to do for ourselves?
Right.
So, and this was the question I wanted to talk about before, and it's still relevant because we've talked about this in terms of gender, in terms of men, and as you've dealt with men. But as a woman, and also as a first gen, my parents were immigrants, and I think that there's this one. There's women and how they defined themselves, and so I'm interested in one aspect of your life. You talked about that when you were raising kids, you stepped away from work for a bit of time. So I want to know how did you feel about your identity when you weren't working, right? So I know there's a big a debate between the stay-at-home mom and the working mom, right? So there's that aspect, but then there's also this immigrant um, who we've. I'm going to speak very broadly, and so I'm mindful of the words that I use, but I do believe that a lot of immigrants have bought into that dream of if you come to America and you put your head down and you work really hard, you can have whatever this dream is. And so as you're talking about men, I would love to talk about how this plays out for women as well as for the first gen immigrant.
Wow. Excellent question and big question. We could spend hours. um, so I want to break this down somehow so that I can try to cover as much of it as I can. You know, we all want to contribute and be purposeful and be viewed as valuable, right? And
Yeah.
feel valued.
Mhm.
So I think that is the core piece, whether you're a woman, a man. It's interesting what you're saying about immigrant. My family came over, let's say in the 1860s, but they were immigrants when they came here. And unfortunately, I don't have that option to talk to them about it, but I would imagine they felt the same thing. They want to show up, they want to contribute, they want to do a good job and be valued. So I think all of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, if this doesn't make sense or doesn't speak to what you're asking, I think it has to do with feeling valued and appreciated, and like you are contributing and doing something important. And I put that in quotations because that's a very funky kind of thing. Important. What is that?
Right.
You
Right.
know. But I really think so for our ancestors who came here and for our parents, and all of it had to do with being upwardly mobile, because that was the great thing about coming to America. If you worked hard, then you could succeed and acquire all this stuff. No other country technically really provided that opportunity in the way that the United States did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's true.
That's true.
And so when our parents and forefathers and grandparents and folks came, that was the hope and the wish that if they worked hard, they did what they were supposed to. They toed the line, whatever language, everybody has different language for this, by the way. It's very interesting. That they would they could succeed. And again, that's also defined in different ways by different people and cultures. So I think that's changed. And not necessarily for the best, because I do think that those folks that came over had these great opportunities, succeeded, and not everyone, but in general, move forward. I think now some of the immigrant groups that are coming over are being stymied, unfortunately. And that's a whole other discussion, so I don't want to get at all. But it's a shame because that's what we were all about, providing that opportunity. And I will say that if you worked hard, you could make it here. But it was more complicated, obviously, than that. But that was the thought, that I think if we could interview our, grandparents, I bet they would talk about that.
Yeah.
Where they felt that it was a place where there was opportunity.
So knowing what you know, knowing what you know from your clients in the past, knowing this history, had all of that helped you navigate when you decided to retire, helped you navigate what retirement would look like for you, as well as help you navigate any of that guilt or shame of perhaps I might have an empty calendar, or guilt or shame around your own identity and
Mhm.
what that would be because of retirement. So did you capture some lessons learned before you decided to retire?
Thank you for asking that question. Yes, I was very fortunate um, that I did have these great, shall I say, teachers that I was working with. I was there to help. So the project, this particular project for those few years, was to prevent institutionalization through counseling, which meant that I worked with people who were struggling in one way or another, might be depressed or whatever, but they had all this wealth of knowledge and experience. And that was what we worked with, they worked with to make themselves feel better and figure out what this next chapter, ironically, was going to look like. So,
Go ahead.
what I learned from talking to people, watching people experience this, was that part of what will help me retire, and this is how I viewed it,
Yeah.
was to make a plan. And the other part was to not plan too much. So it's a paradox. I know, but it worked for me.
Mhm.
And so I thought about what is it that I've been, as I said before, putting off and haven't been able to do, would love to do. Of
Right.
course, the first thing, travel, right? Isn't that the first thing you think about? Spending more time with family, friends, all that good stuff. But then it was also, you know, just having time alone in the house, sorting things out. Like, it's amazing all the things that you can keep yourself busy with. That's what I want to say, if you let yourself. And one might say, well, how does that define your worth? Because that's what we're talking about, and in your other sessions about titles and how that defines our worth. And so it's just the idea of being productive. Who's to say that the only way you can be productive is through a job or through a profession, or
Right.
there are
Mhm.
many other ways. So I kind of pieced together, and maybe I was cheating a little because of what I did professionally, but I
Yeah,
pieced.
I was gonna ask you that. Do you feel that because you've had the background, you've had so many conversations with people
Mhm.
that
You have a
were
different
going
insight.
not just, "Oh, my mom retired," or like for myself or dad retired. You, as you said, you were talking to 100 clients a
A
month.
month.
So so I was going to ask, you had this wealth of different experiences from people to draw upon as to, "This can work for me, this probably wouldn't." Right? Is that correct?
Right, let's say there were 30 people a week, but they were
Mhm.
the same 30 people, maybe a
Mhm.
few added this way or that way. But as you go through the process, you begin to learn a lot. You
Yeah.
see what people struggle with, you
Yeah.
see people's successes and the things that aren't as successful. And I was very young when I did this, so I wasn't thinking totally about, okay, someday that'll be me. I did think a little bit about that, but there were lessons that I took with me that came back later on when I started to face my own what's next. And I
Right.
will confess, I took a very long time to retire because I'd said to myself, I don't like, who's to say when, how, where? That's something else. Like, we have to learn to be flexible and to not
Yeah.
make all these artificial do or don't or die kind of moments. And I allowed myself to do that. And the pandemic came. So that was something else that fed into it, that, that phenomenon will be happening to most of us again, God willing. Um, so it's interesting, sometimes I don't even know that I'm retired. I'll be honest with you, because I was president of my Rotary Club and I did this, that, and the other thing, and I keep very busy. So it's like, whoa. I think the
Yeah.
way one might define retirement is, are you getting an income or not? And I wasn't anymore. So that's how I saw it as retirement. But I certainly had all these roles and involvement. I'm not saying that's the only way to do this. It's not. I think people really, first of all, I think people should prepare for retirement. No matter what, think about what is it that you want to do? Or maybe you don't know what that is, but what do you love? What do you celebrate? What have you been putting off? So there are multiple questions to ask. And then allowing yourself to just experience things. And again, I will emphasize, you don't have to fill up every moment of your time.
Yeah.
You can just be. That really helps. Sit by a river or a lake and just think and feel and smell and see. We don't do that very much, especially when we're caught up in here.
No.
And I recommend it highly. Even now, even with your busy lives, it makes a difference.
I'm going to take that as a challenge. And so if I make it a challenge, I'm likely to actually do it. But what I'm realizing in this conversation is understanding that the discomfort that we feel with the empty calendar is really not indication of us, right? It's not a character flaw. It's something that we've inherited, right? It's part of our culture. And like with all inheritances, we get to decide what we keep. And so hearing you say this, like we get to actually make a choice with how we're going to spend this time and what things will serve us. And I think the thing that struck me about what you just said is, and I think about as I move into that phase, I don't want to replace one sort of busy for another sort of busy. I'd like my retirement to be as you've discussed, as you said, right? Yes, I can volunteer, spend time with family, but I don't want to have that same urgency that I have this list of things that I must get to because that chapter will look the same as the last chapter, and that's not what I'm working for.
Right.
Thank you. That's exactly my message. So thank you for hearing it. I was worried that I wasn't communicating it. So
No, you are. And continuing that thought from what Cecilia was just saying, it's also the value of your work. And yes, everyone needs to feel valued, but not replacing the value you felt because of that title with these other
Some other things,
things
yes.
that fill your calendar. So just needing to need, or needing to be busy. And so not equating that with your worth as well is what I'm getting from this conversation, really.
Yeah. And I think so Sylvia, so thank you for walking us through even your own process. But what I'm interested in, because, and as Michelle said, 100 sessions, 30 people, you have a very large sample size to pull from that most people don't have access to. And so, as you said, it took you a while to make your own decision to actually step away. And so I'm interested in, because you know a little bit more than most when it comes to this particular topic. So what surprised you about your own response to stepping away?
Well, it's a great question. My gut answer is that I wanted to keep it the same. I wanted to have the schedule and the full calendar, and I had to really stop myself and pull myself up short and go, what am I doing? This is exhausting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that was very powerful for me, because I was caught up in that very, purposeful way of being, right?
Mhm.
It has been phenomenal just to deal with open space and open time and, taking a class or taking lessons or just going for a walk or meeting friends for lunch. very mundane kinds of things, or just, straightening up the house, projects I put off forever. So it's really allowing yourself the time to be, and I'm sure you've heard this in other you know, phenomenon, that we don't always allow ourselves to be. But being is really important to figure out sometimes what the next direction or the next step is. And I think that was something that I learned, both not only from what I was doing, but from the experience of trying to let go and not allowing myself to let go, this push pull. Because a lot of people with what I do never retire. But
Mm.
I decided that I wanted to make that transition for a lot of reasons. My family lives far away. I knew I was going to have grandchildren. I wanted to do certain things that I had been putting off. So, but it's a process. And I think that's what one of my messages is: allow yourself to go through that process. I think for some people it's a no-brainer. They're just able to do it. God bless them. I don't know. Like,
Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna be that person.
but for those of us, it's the way we were raised. It's the way
Yeah.
our messages, our parent, what are you doing? Just get up and do so, whatever, all those little messages we got.
Right.
So, yeah, I can't emphasize enough that this is a time when you can really do for yourself, and just it's maybe the only time, maybe not, I don't know, but for me it was, where I could focus on myself,
Yeah.
and not in a self-centered or selfish way, but say, okay, so what do I want this to look like? Because we take on all these roles, daughter, sister, we're in a relationship, we're working, we're, whatever our title is, that it's always so other oriented. And I know I said this before, but I'd like to emphasize it. This is a time, and I think it's why I celebrate it, when I suggest don't make it other oriented, make it self oriented. And it's not selfish, and it's not self centered in this kind of negative way. We always think of anything self as negative. It's not.
Right.
It's about, okay, this is my life, and how do I want to proceed with it? And what do I want it to look like? And that's okay.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
just circling it now back to identity before we close. Has whatever your new definition of productivity is, as you said, where it is self-centered. So it could be a day where, as you said, you didn't get dressed and you're in your pajamas all day. It could be a day where you're meeting friends. It could be a day where you're working on a project at the house. Whatever that productivity time is, during those times, have you ever felt any guilt or had to think twice about your own identity because of the quieter calendar?
I
Or
think
have you
at,
not?
I think at the beginning, I definitely thought, like, what is my life going to be like? What is this enough?
Right.
That's another part of it that could be like a whole other session. Is it enough? Right? We talk about being enough. So I think I went through iterations of this, but I'm going to make you laugh. I think I did it quickly because I kept on coming back to the fact that I really loved what I did, and I really did take care of people and give back. And I feel blessed that I have that. And I didn't want that to stop. I still do it in other ways,
Right.
but I just wanted to open another chapter of myself, because I want to show up for this is a personal thing, for my children and my grandchildren in a certain way. So I had to look at that a little differently.
Mhm. Okay. I appreciate this. I appreciate this so much. There's so many things to think about, but I think as we're getting ready to wrap up in a second, um, it sounds to me that the goal is not to stop valuing work. It's to stop needing it to tell you who you are.
Yes. Yes. I think that that's definitely a great way of putting it. That, yes. You know, I guess one might say, are you your work or is your work you?
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
And I think we are we, and we make our work be what it is.
Yeah.
And we take us with us wherever we go. And I've had this conversation with other people and, in my stage of being, and that's important. And that we don't lock ourselves into rigidity, that we allow ourselves to be.
Yeah. So before we close, Sylvia, we always ask our guests if they had to introduce themselves right now in this season of their life to someone, how would you introduce yourself in 3 words where it's not your family title or your, in your case, your past career title?
Kind,
Yeah.
caring, and adventurous.
Kind, caring, and adventurous. Okay. Is there any one of those that ring a little truer that you think you're leaning into more?
I think all 3, right? I think adventurous is
Kind.
one that's new for me in certain ways.
Mhm.
But kind and caring is just my nature. I think I was born that way. I take it for granted. So, no, I don't mean to sound that's pretty bold, and but so I think adventurous is the one that I would like to focus on most, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It
In a
does.
kind and caring way.
Yeah.
I like that. Like that.
No, this was really great. And, tying it back to the beginning of where we talked about the foundation of all of this and the history and bringing in your story as well as you as a therapist speaking to your clients, but as well as your own lived experience in around retirement. I will come back to the pour and the rosemary around the remembrance
Mhm.
that it's really not that rest was not was rest wasn't where it wasn't allowed. It was always allowed. We always were able to have the
Mhm.
rest, but it's really more about us remembering that it's okay, that it's really allowed for us to do that as well. So I think that's something we should
That's
leave with ourselves as well as
absolutely
all of you around that rest. It's okay to rest, and
permission.
yeah, you have that permission to do so, and you shouldn't feel guilty if you are doing it. So
I would agree with you. And I think what I would challenge our listeners is to think about their definition of rest. And if rest feels like something you have to earn, I'm speaking to myself, you're not broken, right? You're carrying something very old. And so you get to decide whether or not you keep carrying it or you put it down. And so the challenge is looking forward to some upcoming restful days.
yes, that you don't have to earn.
I don't have to, I've earned it already, or I don't have to earn it at all.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes. So thank you so much, Sylvia,
Sylvia, this was
for
great.
joining us. Thank you for providing that feedback, the comment from episode 2 around this. So appreciated, and really do appreciate when listeners are engaged and they leave with the thoughts that make them want to, learn a little bit more. So really, really do appreciate you and for sharing your experience with us.
Thank you
you,
so much
Sylvia.
for having me and giving me this opportunity. It's just phenomenal. Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. It's wonderful.
Thanks for spending time with us on the After Chapter podcast.
Like, follow, subscribe, and share. Until next time, pause,
take
take a sip,
and
and stay with what's unfolding.
Oh, one more thing. Here comes the legal part. Our lawyers will be really happy we said this. The After Chapter podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. We are two women pouring into this conversation with you. We are not licensed therapists, and nothing you hear on this show is intended to replace the advice of a physician, therapist, professional coach, or any other qualified professional. If you're in a season that calls for deeper support, please reach out to a professional and know that reaching out is one of the bravest things you can do.